Hi, I'm Karim and Dan, CEO of Crowd Favorite, and today I'm really excited to have a conversation with Dan Drapu. He is from DXP Catalyst, and he is one of the leading experts on talking about what's going on with the DXP space and the different content management systems that are out there. Hearing you say is that some of them are calling it composability, even if all it means is we have 8 different features and you can turn them on and off separately. That's
Right,
their idea
or
of composable,
basically,
right?
or, these products have APIs, so therefore it's composable.
Right. But as we know, saying you have an API and having that API be complete enough to actually get data in and out are 2 different things.
Right.
Um, it's interesting. I heard you mention Squiz. That actually came up recently. We've got a long-standing WordPress client that was very impressed with Squiz's site search functionality.
Yeah.
So we've been talking with them about an integration between WordPress and Squiz's site search. And
Mhm.
they seem very excited about the idea. And that to me is an example of true composability, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, I see Squiz and Uniform are the 2 vendors I see where they're not closed loop. They're open to combining multiple solutions, whether it's open source or another vendor. So, yeah, actually, I just released a newsletter this morning about funnel back search, which is part of Squiz's DXP ecosystem now. It's fantastic, and I definitely could see a lot of clients who are using WordPress absolutely take advantage of that.
Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of opportunities there. On the other hand, I'm not seeing a lot of opportunities with some of the other major monolithic vendors that have declared composability.
Yeah.
Um, and that's worrisome, right? Um, but hybrid models um, are actually also starting to create vendor lock-in.
Mhm.
Um, you know, and again, I'm an admirer of Dries and the Acquia open source project, but they've done a very good job of taking Acquia and really creating a little bit of a fork in the road
Mhm.
between Drupal and Acquia's Drupal.
Yeah, that's certainly a unique situation. They market themselves as a composable DXP, but it's really, like you said, more of a hybrid model than a full composability ecosystem. So at the core, it's still reliant on Drupal, right? It doesn't have the same modular, interchangeable architecture that you see with some other vendors. And a lot of their tools, I know some of these have been renamed, but like I think Convert, CDP, DAM, Site Studio, those are all designed to work within their ecosystem. So true composable DXPs do enable you to have more of like a best of breed selection if that's what you wanted to do. So they do have like API first integrations, but it still leans toward like a Drupal first mentality. Other vendors that are really composable, I see it being more back end agnostic, if that makes sense.
Yes, but technically, if a team or an agency is a real expert in Drupal, they could take Drupal open source or even Drupal Acquia and still create an open source or a open source hub
Mhm.
for a composable DXP. I don't think Acquia is mandating that you have to use their solution for DAM or personalization. They're just offering it to you, is how I feel that's happening, because the open source nature of Drupal still lets you do that. They're not really closing the garden completely like some of the non-open source systems, is how it feels. But what do you
Yeah,
think?
maybe that's the case for certain products of theirs, like Site
Hmm.
Studio, but not the case for like CDP or personalized, because there really isn't anything stopping you from integrating with an alternative solution. I mean, just the
Got
very nature of Drupal, like taking Acquia aside, you could download a CDP module that integrates with the tool, so you can kind of do whatever you want with that kind of open ecosystem.
it. Right. So let's dig down into that. What is the difference between composability and truly a walled garden?
So yeah, like a lot of the vendors do claim to be composable, but when you look closer, they're still kind of pushing customers toward their own suite of products.
Mm.
So composability should mean like interoperability across multiple platforms, not just within a vendor's ecosystem. So a lot of vendors, maybe not so much Acquia, but a lot of vendors are kind of locking customers into their own personalization, CDP, or content tools.
Mhm.
Um, and if a platform is not really built for coexistence with other best of breed solutions, I question if it's really composable. Uniform is another vendor I just brought up a few minutes ago. It's one of those like solutions that enables composability rather than just like marketing it. So unlike
Mm.
traditional DXPs, it's backend and front end agnostic. So it allows companies to integrate multiple CMS solutions. So that makes it more like an orchestration layer than a walled garden.
Is Uniform pure SaaS or is it an open source solution?
It
I'm
is
not familiar.
pure SaaS, I believe.
Got it. Interesting. Well, as you know, at Crowd Favorite, we try to really focus down on some of the open source and keeping that as the hub. But I can see where you can even use a closed source solution sort of as a hub of a composable system, and then decide you want to use different aspects of different platforms. So that
Mhm.
makes sense.
One
Um,
question I wanted to ask you, while we were kind of on the topic of Acquia, so of course, I know your agency focuses really on open source and WordPress specifically. So Acquia has kind of built that open source solution in Drupal. Why haven't we seen like a similar movement around WordPress? There's like WordPress isn't featured, of course, in the Gartner DXP. So like, why haven't we seen something similar to like what Acquia is doing, but with WordPress?
well, we actually are starting to see it. And so my agency was founded on actually the premise of scaling WordPress for the enterprise.
Mhm.
And since then, we've also included other technologies like Laravel and Python and all the other wonderful open source technologies that are out there. But we really do have sort of a special pedigree in really being able to scale WordPress. And for many years, WordPress was seen as just a publishing system, whether it's blog or for publishers only. It
Mhm.
was really how can we just scale content management? And you might have noticed over the last 5 or 10 years, Automatic has been acquiring companies like Parsley for the analytics,
Mhm.
and they're acquiring other systems to add on to. I don't know if I'd call it a walled garden, but I know that when you have WordPress hosting on Automatic, they're really heavy on making sure that you know about Parsley and you can use Parsley as your analytics.
Sure.
I think the future is more and more hosts, whether they're enterprise or direct to consumer or direct to small business, are doing that. Elementor has type of hosting. If you go to if you go to even the hosting of SiteGround, when you install WordPress, it says, here's some add-ons that'll help you turn it into a more robust system in their
Mhm.
secondary products. Um, I think that is the future, is especially in the enterprise space, you're going to see um, the folks who have these enterprise hosting companies make more and more available tools wise to you. My direction for my clients will be make sure you're not getting locked in, make sure they're not turning it into a um, walled garden, that you can use their system out of convenience if it's the best solution for you, but you
Mhm.
also can shift away and use something else because that's the whole point of open source, right?
Right.
So, bottom line, I think we're going to see it coming. It's happening. Also, in Gartner's report this year was mention of the evolution of headless and mentions of contentful and content stack. What are your thoughts around how headless CMS vendors are shifting towards DXP?
Yeah, it was interesting. There's a million, headless pure play like headless CMS solutions out there now. Contentful and Content Stack were certainly the two big ones that are in the space that have been around for a long time. Um, I always kind of thought they would remain just as headless CMS solutions and not kind of convert into more composable suites. Um, so it's been interesting over the last few months to kind of see what they've done in the market. I believe it was like last August or so, Contentful acquired Ninetailed for personalization. So I'm not sure the status of that, if that's fully integrated into their product ecosystem yet. And then Content Stack already had their own native personalization solutions, but then they acquired Lytics, the CDP. And yeah, both were kind of listed in the Gartner Magic Quadrant. So I feel like it's a little bit premature. They're making the right acquisitions and they're gradually going to become what I would consider to be like true DXPs. But, when you're kind of looking at a DXP as an ecosystem of capabilities, just because you have a content management system and a personalization or CDP solution doesn't really make you a CDP. I think you need to be able to support additional tools and offerings and not just have a connector for every single thing. So like Acquia would be considered a DXP, even though they don't have a commerce solution. They still have connectors for commerce tools and BigCommerce and some other vendors out there. So I was especially surprised, I guess, to see Content Stack because the report came out middle of January and they announced the CDP acquisition like a week prior. So it's not like that's been magically integrated into their like ecosystem and they have like a full blown DXP. So in terms of what they're doing in general, it's interesting. I think for them to remain competitive in the market, it's probably the right move. But they're kind of starting behind a lot of other vendors like Optimizely who have kind of perfected a composable suite. So it'll be interesting, I guess, to see how those two vendors in particular, Content Stack and Contentful, continue to improve year after year.
But it definitely then feels like Gartner is pushing DXP rather than reporting on DXP, if that's the case. Does it feel like that to you? Is there some sort of market pressure?
Um, Maybe a little bit. Gartner doesn't have a CMS report anymore, right? So I mean, they just have. I think they used to, and they did away with it, and now it's DXP, and has been for a few years. So yeah, maybe they are really pushing it, and that's why Contentful and Content Stack are in there. If you kind of loosen your definition of DXP. So yeah, that's kind of what I'm thinking there.
Well, that's telling right there. If Gartner has completely done away with the CMS Magic Quadrant, then they really have sort of doubled down on you have to have more than just content management, and you have to start managing more and more features in what is it, managing your website, I guess.
Yeah, I would say that's accurate. I mean, Gardner certainly has moved in that direction. I think the only major analyst that's still producing CMS related reports is Forrester. They've got their wave for CMS or headless CMS solutions, but Gardner certainly has kind of moved in just the DXP only direction, which I think is fair. So, what's your perspective on Contentful and Content Stack moving in this composable suite and DXP direction?
Well, to be honest, I think that headless has had a hard time finding its market long term.
Mm,
Um, I feel like it was a market term that was brought up by engineers and the need for
yeah.
speed and performance. And they really didn't round out their market, go to market presence. So, in coming back and now saying, Well, we were born as a headless system, but now we're moving to a composable suite. Lets them come back to the mainstream conversation. Um, and I'm all for it. We need to have more ways of having customers have options, but at the same time, then what's the composable aspect and what's the headless aspect and how do those intertwine? I don't feel they're doing a good job yet explaining to us their value proposition.
Yeah, so it's really about kind of expanding their feature sets to remain competitive in the market.
Exactly. Exactly. So now turning towards enterprise needs versus sort of vendor feature expansion. Um, let's talk about the gap between added features and what the enterprise strategy needs. It feels again like all these platforms are trying to get as horizontal as possible when there's a lot of opportunity to go deep and really make their layers of features better rather than just keep adding on to the side and bolting on. What are you seeing?
I think it's more about organizations needing a more strategic approach to digital experience, and that's kind of driving their decisions. Some customer expectations have evolved, like businesses need to better leverage data for personalizing experiences, refining content strategies, improving search and discoverability of content. So they're taking more of like a strategic approach to digital experience platforms. So I think that's more the case than whether or not they're looking for just more features in a CMS. I think the feature set for CMS solutions hasn't really evolved a whole lot outside of like some Gen AI improvements that are integrated into them. What do you think on that?
Well, I think you're right. I think content management has become sort of there's an expectation there of what you see is what you get and front side editing and a bunch of interesting things there. Um, Past that, really what we're finding is that what's driving customers to look past CMS comes down to the change in analytics. For quite literally almost 25 years, we were all driven by Google Analytics and analytics in one direction. And
Mhm.
with the retirement of cookies and first party data and personalization, I feel like the conversations are now going like, okay, we know how to push content out, but how do we create this personalized experience? And when they say that, they really mean many different things. They're not saying it in a technical sense as much as a how do we engage and keep our customers engaged?
Mhm.
That to me is what DXP really means is instead of just publishing out one-way content, how do I create content that evolves and continues a conversation with my customer?
Mhm.
That's what they're looking for. All right, Dan. So please tell me why, after so many years, open source is really not being looked at besides really Acquia in DXPs. Why can't we get the attention of Gartner and other analysts to say, to create a truly composable DXP, uh, start with an open source hub and you really can make it choose your own adventure?
Yeah, so Gardner is just strictly going to report on vendors. So I think it's more up to agencies and consultants to kind of push that direction. Like here's what's possible with open source, using it potentially as like a hub. It's not all about proprietary vendors, but I don't think Gardner is really going to do that. Just thinking about WordPress, for example, right? It doesn't qualify as a DXP because it doesn't have like the full comprehensive integrated features for a true DXP.
Right.
So yeah, I mean that's certainly a challenge with that. Their report has to have like strict criteria, and with like WordPress's modular nature and reliance on third-party extensions, it's kind of creates gaps in the ability to deliver seamless and integrated functionality that you see in other DXPs.
Thank you again for this great conversation around the 2025 Gartner DXP Magic Quadrant. I'd like to invite everybody to go to DXP Catalyst and subscribe to Dan's newsletter, and follow up with Crowd Favorite on our website for more insights. We look forward to continuing the conversation online. Please feel free to get a hold of either one of us with any questions. Dan, thank you.
Thank you, Karim.